So let's just say that, you're just a normie and you look at these Epstein files, and how do you feel? You feel fear for your children, right? So at some point, as more of these allegations emerge, as the Epstein files reveal the depravity of the global elite, right? So things that we haven't seen so far, but which should be in the Epstein files, are snuff films, right? I mean, like if you just look at where the Epstein files are going, what's been revealed so far, you can imagine that what they're not releasing are snuff films, and there are other levels of depravity as well. And then you have also like the hunting of children, where you let children into the forest and you hunt them like you would like rabbits or something. It's all in there, and they'll release it sooner or later, okay? But the entire point is to traumatize the population so that they'll be much more amenable to state authority.
Yeah, I want to ask you, so there's two conflicting things going on, right? When it comes to eschatology, what it's stated to create greater Israel, to expand from the Nile to the Euphrates, is that they need to intentionally spread anti-Semitism so that Jews can operate as a monolithic group. But how does that coincide with the fact that they also need support? They need to have people hating Iran and also thinking that the US and Israel are the same country and should work together. How do you spread anti-Semitism while also Netanyahu's paying people $7,000 per post? He's going on the Nelk Boys podcast. How do you spread anti-Semitism but also get support? Because if you don't have that faith that this war is something good, that's probably why the Vietnam War was such a disaster, is that they knew from the jump, which you said in your lecture, that this was a losing battle, but they kept on fighting because the casino effect, right? Once you go into the casino, you can't leave because once you lose, you want to make back your losses. So how are they intentionally spreading anti-Semitism while also gaining support for this war?
Right, okay. So this goes back to the founding of Zionism. Okay, so this is Theodore Herzl, and this is the end of the 19th century. And he was trying to create a homeland for the Jews, right? And they're looking at different possibilities, including like, Uganda and in Israel, Palestine. But the problem with Palestine, of course, was that you had Arabs living there already. And so Theodore Herzl was going around promoting this plan. And he was backed by secret societies and by transnational capital. And the problem, of course, is that Jews were like, this is retarded. We're happy in Britain. We're happy in Germany. We're happy in America. Why the hell would we want to go to a desert where everyone's poor and it's just backward? So only about 3% of the entire population of Jews around the world at that time supported the idea of a homeland for Jews, right? Also, there were these religious considerations in that if you do this, if you set up a homeland for the Jews, you're going against the will of God, because Jews believe that they will return to Jerusalem when the Messiah appears. And God will appoint the Messiah to appear. So let's just wait for the Messiah to appear and then we'll go home, okay? So that was the faith of Jews at that time. But then, of course, you had certain events that happened in the 20th century which compelled the Jews to return to Israel and to found the state of Israel. And that, of course, is the Holocaust and World War II. If you look at the history of World War II and the rise of Hitler, well, there's a lot of suspicious activity. Okay, I mean, like I don't want to get into it because I don't want you banned from everywhere. Okay,
yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean but if you look at some of the evidence, the evidence will tell you is that Hitler had every reason to work with the Zionists, right? Because Hitler's ambition was to get rid of the Jews. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to kill the Jews because that would look bad. What he wanted to do was get the Jews and make them leave, right? And then you have the Zionists in Palestine who want the Jews to come to Palestine. So of course they work together. In fact, they have these memos of cooperation where Hitler would send Jews to Palestine.
The Havar agreement.
Exactly. So and these are documents, okay? So the idea of anti-Semitism is not, let's hate Jews. The entire point of anti-Semitism is let's get the Jews to go back to Israel and leave us alone, right? I mean, the entire message of anti-Semitism is like Jews are only loyal to Israel, and therefore they should go to Israel and leave us alone, right?
Right. And Germany had such a great economic recovery. I don't know if you're allowed to say this, but it's just factually true that Germany was in an economic disaster after World War I, but after they changed the banks, and they kept them private, if I'm not mistaken, and they refused to interact with transnational capital the way that they were before, Germany recovered in a way that Europe had never seen.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I mean, back in the 1930s, Hitler was Times Man of the Year. I mean, he was celebrated throughout the world for restoring the German economy, mainly by nationalizing the German economy, by restoring sovereignty, monetary sovereignty, right? Because before Hitler, most of the German economy was geared towards repaying war debts, reparations, and Germany was being controlled by something called the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Germany, which is like the central bank of central banks. And in existence, the entire point of the Bank of International Settlements is to force Germany to pay all its resources to other nations. Okay, so Germany was being bled out, and then Hitler promised national rejuvenation. He promised national sovereignty. He didn't want to conquer the world. He just wanted to be left alone, right? I mean, like that was his message. Like, we, the German people, ought to have our own nation, and we ought to rule this nation by ourselves. But because Hitler was destroying transnational capital, because he was kicking out the central banks, right, the Bank of the International Settlements, then the response is to declare war, right? So you make the argument that all Hitler wanted was national sovereignty, but that national sovereignty would disrupt transnational capital, and therefore transnational capital had to conspire to create a war to get rid of him. And look, this is a pattern throughout the 20th century. Like, whenever you try to defy transnational capital, then they go after you. Okay, this is true for every nation, with everyone, right? You look at these nations that have been destroyed by the American military, or the nations that are being targeted by the American military, right? These nations that are destroyed, or Libya, Syria, Iraq, they don't have central banks. Countries that are being targeted right now, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, they don't have central banks either, right? So you can make the argument the entire point of the military-industrial complex is to make the world safe for transnational capital. That's it.
Right. You can hear that rhetoric from Pam Bondi when she's being pressured about Epstein. I'm sure you've seen this. She starts saying, "But the Dow is up. The stock market is thriving. So why don't look into Epstein? Let's just go and look at the Dow."
That's who her boss is. That's who pays her, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you looked at Epstein extensively. I haven't seen your lectures on Germany in the 30s and the National Socialist movement, but so Epstein right now, that is, first off, I expected a lot more of an awakening from that. The 3 million files released. There's ironically 6 million files that are supposed to be released, which is a funny number. But what should we expect? What are your predictions now with the Epstein files? Is this being released intentionally to get people to start hating? Is this another move for the Pax Judaica expansion?
Yeah, right. So the entire point of Pax Judaica is to create an AI surveillance state, right? And I talk about this, where you have data centers controlling everyone's information. You have digital ID, digital currency. The problem is, how do you convince people to go into this world of AI surveillance? Well, the best way is for children, right? So let's just say that you're just a normie, you're a suburban wine mom, and you look at these Epstein files, and how do you feel? You feel fear for your children, right? So at some point, as more of these allegations emerge, as the Epstein files reveal the depravity of the global elite, right? So things that we haven't seen so far, but which should be in the Epstein files, are snuff films, right? I mean, like if you just look at where the Epstein files are going, what's been revealed so far, you can imagine that what they're not releasing are snuff films, and there are other levels of depravity as well. And then you have also like the hunting of children, where you let children into the forest and you hunt them like you would like rabbits or something. So it's all in there, and they'll release it sooner or later, okay? But the entire point is to traumatize the population so that they'll be much more amenable to state authority, right? So how can we prevent Epstein from emerging again? Well, let's microchip our children, right? If you put a microchip in your kid, in his bloodstream, you'll never be afraid of your child going missing, because there are hundreds of thousands of children who go missing every year in the United States alone. You think about these 20 million migrants who came in through the Biden administration, right? These legal immigrants. A lot of the children went missing as well, right? So there's this huge industry for the kidnapping of children, And so if you make that, the omnipresent issue, if this is all that people think about, then you make it much more easier for people to accept the idea of microchipping their children,
Okay,
right?
just like 9/11 was used for the Patriot
Exactly.
Act and mass surveillance. So you think that the Epstein files released now is to traumatize people to spread what Palantir wants, what Peter Thiel wants with, mass surveillance, that this is another, and there is conflicting ideas. I'm not sure how this correlates, but I saw that now a lot of American parents don't want their kids to be going to picture day anymore because they found that
Yep.
the biggest picture day organization, which you have to put your fingerprint, you have to take a picture of yourself, you have to put your age.
Exactly.
Even if you don't pay for the photos, you still have to, you're basically sending it into a database. And if I'm not mistaken, these people are implicated with Epstein. So if we also realize that mass surveillance is the reason that they could target our children, is it going to be that easy to convince them? There was a Super Bowl ad with the Ring camera. That's the company that you could put a camera on your door and you could see your street. They said that there's AI technology, so if your dog runs away in the neighborhood, it can scan all the Ring cameras and AI will figure out where the dog went. Do you think that Americans are going to be that easily convinced of mass surveillance?
Okay, right. So mass surveillance is just part of the picture. Okay, so let's go over the reasons why they would want the Epstein files released, right? Because it's also their choice whether or not to release Epstein files. Okay, so the first is to make people much more amenable to the idea of a surveillance state. Okay, the second issue is to destroy the old elite, right? Because who's in Epstein files? It's the old elite, the financial elite, people like Larry Summers, people like Bill Clinton, people like Bill Gates. Okay, this is the old financial elite I was talking about, which control the world for the longest time. So what you do is you create this rage against Wall Street, those rage against the old financial elite that Epstein was part of. Remember, Epstein hated Trump because Trump was a threat to the old world order that he ran. So that's the reason number two. Reason number three is you create the conditions for civil war. You create conflict in the streets, right? Because the more conflict there is between left and right, the more you can justify the use of a police state. And then number four is a targeting of certain individuals. Okay, so certain individuals that should be in the Epstein files are Bill Clinton. Okay, he's definitely in there, but I think that they're holding back the most inflammatory information for a particular reason, right? Because eventually they want to go after the Clintons, Bill and Hillary Clinton. They want to go after John Podesta, who really is the power broker behind the Democratic Party, and he is. I mean, like you go back to Pizzagate, okay, right? The Podesta emails that was released by WikiLeaks. I mean, like he's heavily implicated, but then basically everyone in the Democratic Party, including Barack Obama, is also implicated in Pizzagate as well. You have Hollywood that's heavily implicated in Pizzagate, in pedophilia. So you want to create as much violence as possible by targeting certain individuals that become like lightning rods for violence. You'll probably have targeted political assassinations that's coming. But basically, the entire intention is to burn America down so that you can rebuild it with an AI surveillance state. Okay, so you need violence on the streets for this AI surveillance state to happen.
So things like ICE, where you see the left and the right are all up in arms about ICE, conveniently around the release of the Epstein files, is this another product of, for lack of a better term, gory slop information like George Floyd to keep us fighting each other and picking sides?
Right. So you go to Rennie Good, okay? So the thing about Rennie Good was, in the back, first of all ICE agents were asked to produce as much social media content as possible, okay? They wanted to showcase as much violence as possible in order to increase recruitment, in order to create as much outrage among the left as possible. You go to Renee Good and you look at the evidence, and it seemed as though the intention was to kill her. It seemed as though the man was provoked. He had certain rage for the arrogance, for the hubris of someone like Rennie Good, right? Because remember, during the Obama years, it was these suburban, left white women that was really in control, right? They're the ones responsible for DEI. They're responsible for woke politics. which suppress these rural conservative men that's now working for ICE. So there's just already this civil war going on between liberal suburban women who are educated and these rural conservative men who are just high school graduates. And so and then remember JD Vance after the video came out, he actually promoted this video on the internet, and everyone's like, wait a minute, this isn't it doesn't escapade. It doesn't prove that this man was innocent. In fact, it does the opposite. And what they don't understand is that JD Vance is promoting this video because it's a recruitment video. It's to show that if you join ICE, you can now seek vengeance against all these white liberal women who've been oppressing you ever since the Obama years. Okay, so a civil war is being instigated, it's being provoked, it's being planned.
Mm-hmm. And overall, so the bigger picture is that it's the transfer. So now the new world order is the tech, Palantir, mass surveillance age, where it used to be Wall Street and global transnational banking. But then how does the family like the Rothschilds, who Epstein in the emails, he said that he represents the Rothschilds. This is a family who has manipulated what you mentioned in your lecture, that the Rothschild family knew that the Battle of Waterloo was actually won by the British against the French, but they manipulated the media because they were in control of the media at the time in order to instill panic within England, and then they bought up all the low stock. Does a family like the Rothschild family suffer, or do they continue their reign under the tech age?
Yeah, so if you're the Rothschilds, you're betting on both sides, right? Remember that's what transnational capital does. It bets on both sides. So you go back to the Bolshevik Revolution. It funded both the Bolsheviks and the whites, right? And you go back to World War II, it was funding every side, right? So your transnational capital, that's how you play the game. So the Rothschilds have investments in both, right? And look, if you're the Rothschild and before you put your money into stocks, now you put your money into data centers, right? Now you put your money into Israel.
Okay, so they play both. I think that's one of the hardest red pills for people to swallow, is that both sides are serving the same people, right? People have so much allegiance, and I've been reiterating this the whole year, that I don't know how you feel, but I don't align with any political ideology, right? I'm getting called a communism by people like Matt Walsh, and then people on the far left will call me a Nazi. I get called a radical Islamist. They say you're alt-right and all this stuff. I'm sure you get accusations for the same thing as well. But detailed through your lectures, it just becomes completely evident that all these isms, and even in the words of Dennis Prager, he said every single ism, except for Nazism, has been predominantly run by Jews. And this is a Jewish man who runs one of the biggest conservative media platforms in America. This is him saying this, right? All these isms serve the same goal. Is that true? And do you have a political affiliation at all?
Yeah, so I think the point of these isms, right, is to create a a dialectic, which then creates change, okay? So let's go back to communism. And I talked about this, right, where capitalism, transnational capital, was creating a lot of problems. And at this time in history, there were two separate solutions to the problem of capitalism. The first solution was socialism, which is the redistribution of wealth. The second solution is anarchism, which is say like let's get rid of government, because what's the point of government anyway? All they do is serve bankers, right? So these were two extremely popular isms during the 19th century. And the solution is to create communism, because when you create communism, what you do is you discredit both anarchism and socialism, right? Because the point of communism is you need a revolutionary vanguard in order to create as much violence as possible, overthrow the bourgeoisie, and then instill a communist dictatorship, a workers' paradise. And now if you're a liberal, and before if you're a liberal middle class individual, you don't have problems with socialism, because socialism, redistribution of wealth, in theory, you should have more status and power, right, if you're middle class. But now with communism, this is a huge issue. And communism was used in order to eradicate other oppositions towards capitalism, transnational capital, including religion, right? Including monarchies. And so the classic example, of course, is Russia. Russia was resilient against transnational capital because they were an Orthodox faith and they had a czar. And so if you wanted to spread capitalism around the world, and Russia was, this virgin territory, it was very wealthy, then you need communism in order to overthrow the regime. And that's exactly what happened, okay? And the same thing happened in China as well, where because of these cultural prejudices, it was hard for transnational capital to come in and co-opt and enslave the people. But with communism in place, then people's minds are cleared, right? That's what the Cultural Revolution was about. It was to destroy all tradition, all ethnic identity, all sort of national pride, and then you make yourself then open and for enslavement to transnational capital. And that's exactly what's happening in China. Okay, I mean, like I live in China. I'm feeling like this is a zombie civilization. They destroyed the civilization a long time ago. Everyone is utilitarian, like everyone's just money obsessed in this country.
Right. Well, I like your explanation about communism. One, that it's an inevitable trajectory. It goes from capitalism to socialism to communism. You can see that right now in New York City. Just elected a Democratic socialist mayor because everybody has. The average debt in Gen Z is $94,000. People can't afford rent the same way. So naturally, you're going to elect somebody that promises things that are going to be cheaper. But also, your explanation of communism makes perfect sense when you realize that it was in order to direct the conversation away from faith and towards class. And so there's leftist streamers. I don't know if you know Hassan Piker. Someone like this, he hasn't really connected Epstein to Israel, even though it's blatantly obvious all over the files. And it's because people who focus and fixate on communism and socialism, they are meant, and the whole goal of communism is to get people speaking about the class issue. So now Israel is not a part of Pax Judaica. Israel is not part of a bigger faith movement. It's really about class. It's a fascist state. It's class warfare, which distracts from what's really going on and what was always supposed to happen in eschatology.
Okay, so I'll tell something really funny.
Okay.
So Pax Judaica, this tech oligarchy that this surveillance state that they're trying to create. The blueprint is a book, 1970 book called Between Two Ages, by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, and he's one of the two big foreign policy giants in America. So the other one, of course, was Henry Kissinger. Okay, so these two are responsible for the grand strategy of America, and he writes this book, Between Two Ages. And he outlines a plan for creating a surveillance state, a nation ruled by experts. Okay, and if you read the book, what's really interesting is he has nothing but praise for Marx, right? And his argument is this: Marx embodies Enlightenment thinking because what Marxism does is it rises above religion and race. It's universal. It's Enlightenment principles. It's reason. Okay. So in other words, what these people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are trying to create is Techno-Marxism, right? Because what's Marxism? Marxism is a nation ruled by a bureaucratic elite that knows more than you do, right? And it's a command economy. Well, that's what the AI surveillance state is. So another word for AI surveillance state is Techno-Marxism.
Techno-Marxism. Usually I take notes in your lecture. I'm like, but I'll go back and watch this. So I think a bigger question here, and what I think was explained well, I keep saying that, but I really do appreciate your lectures, is how Judaism started. So I haven't went completely into the Torah, but is it true, was in original Judaism, was Jesus supposed to be the true Messiah and he was rejected because he was wearing plain clothes and they expected him to be presenting as a man dressed in gold? And is that the true Messiah, or is it always predestined? Was it always written that they had a different Messiah than Jesus?
Yeah, so the Messiah is supposed to be from the house of David, and he was supposed to be a prince, and he was supposed to be a war Messiah, a Messiah of war, right? So the Messiah was supposed to come, unite the Jewish people, and overthrow whatever oppressor existed at that time. So at that time in history, it was the Roman Empire. So they really believed that the Messiah would come, unify the Jewish people, and destroy the Roman Empire and create the Messianic age. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what the Jewish faith taught back then. It's still what the Jews believe today. They believe that what they're doing in Israel is to force the return of the Messiah or the coming of the Messiah, to lead them into victory, right?
The Antichrist, or in Islam we say the Dajjal, which is the same.
Well, yeah, so for the Jews, it's a Messiah. For the Christians, it's the Antichrist.
And the
Yes.
Muslims,
Right.
too. The idea of the Antichrist is identical in Islam. That we also accept
Right.
Jesus not just as a prophet, but as the Messiah who will return. And what was detailed well was how Judaism has been subverted for empire gain and for political motives, right? Like the Khazarians, who now dominate 80% of the Jewish faith, they had to decide, so the Khazarians, their empire fell, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The Mongols destroyed the empire. Yes. Yes.
The Mongols destroyed the Khazarians, and so they had to pick a religion in order to get more power, and they picked Judaism because it was seen as as supreme because it came before Islam and Christianity. And also, you mentioned detailed a lot the idea of the Frankists and Jacob Frank and what they were doing with incest and putting their own will first and thinking that sinning separated them from God so that they should sin because they would know more about themselves because God doesn't sin because God is the almighty, perfect, greatest creator. And so sinning is what made us divine in a way, like this Frankist ideology. But it's united. Why do you think that these ideologies have united? Because the Rothschilds, they are seen and pictured with Marina Abramovich, and there's other Rothschild members wearing Baal or Moloch necklaces in this. Are all these subversions, and why do you see the overlap? Why does it seem like they also support Israel? Is that a unification with Judaism? Or the people that are trying to establish Greater Israel, do they allow for this to happen because it also supports their eschatology that they need the end of the world? Are they okay with Moloch and Baal because it does serve the greater picture, or is this a part of Judaism?
Right. So everyone supports Israel because Israel is key to the different eschatologies. Okay. So Pax Judaica is an important element in the divine plan. The Jews basically need to create the Pax Judaica, and then once the Pax Judaica is created, this will start a war, the war of Gog and Magog. And when the war of Gog and Magog happens, and when Israel is most threatened, then the Messiah will return to save Israel. And at this point, depending on your faith, two things will happen, okay? If you're a Christian, you believe that the rapture will happen. When Jesus returns, all Christians of true faith will be elevated to heaven. And then Jesus will defeat the enemies of Israel and force the Jews to convert, okay? So if you're a Jew at this time, you can actually choose to convert or you will burn in hell. Okay, so that's a Christian interpretation of the end times. The Jewish interpretation of the end times is the Messiah will come and all Christians will be enslaved and Israel will become the light of nations, meaning it will become the empire. Okay, the Pax Judaica, and everyone will serve the Jews. Okay, so these are two diverging eschatologies, but where they converge is the triumph of Israel in the Middle East, and that's why we're seeing all these issues in the Middle East. Iran is key because once you destroy Iran, then Israel becomes a de facto power in the Middle East. So,
Right.
so Iran is the last stumbling block, right?
Right. And you mentioned again, which I never made this connection, I was annoyed at myself, that Israel actually wants America to lose the war against Iran because it destabilizes Iran, not the same way, but also, like, so many Americans have this idea that America and Israel, we're allies, they're our greatest ally, but if America loses and we lose our spot as the global empire, then it just gives Israel the opportunity to now dominate the Middle East without our hands meddling in it. But they don't actually, one, they don't give us anything, but two, what do they stand to gain from having us or America as the global empire?
Right. So these eschatologies, they agree on certain things, okay? So they agree that you need to create Pax Judaica for the end times to happen. They also agree that America will not be involved in the end times. So what you need to do is you need to remove America from the equation. And the way you do that is you start this war in Iran, you make this war unwinnable, and it destroys American military capacity in the Middle East, and then it triggers a civil war in America, and so America is distracted from the Middle East. Okay, that's a plan.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so what are your predictions now, your short-term predictions? There's been major developments. You've been speaking about this for several years, and your lectures got a lot of this correct. What do you see coming in the rest of this year? Is the war with Iran, how soon is that, and what else do you predict?
Okay, so look, everything's leading to this war in Iran. Okay, so look, I mean, they were trying to win this war on the cheap, right? So you go back to the 12-day war last year, and the Israelis really believe that we decapitate the regime. If we kill these generals and these officers and these clerics within Tehran, this will rally the people, and the people will not naturally overthrow the regime. Okay, and then what they recognized was the regime is far more resilient, far more cohesive, far more determined than they actually imagined. Okay, so the 12-day war was a disaster. But then if you go back to early this year, during New Year's, Netanyahu visited Trump in Mar-a-Lago. What happened right afterwards is that currency speculators working on behalf of Mossad and CIA, they destroyed the rial, the Iranian currency, and this caused massive economic unrest in Iran, which translated into protests. These merchants were protesting in Iran, and this is the classic color revolution playbook, right? Where you cause economic malaise, you have some organic protests, and then you send in provocateurs in order to shoot police officers. Okay, so they killed a lot of security officers. A lot of money was flowing in the country. They brought in some Kurds as insurgents to cause more unrest, and then you control social media, right? You inflame people through social media. But the Iranian response, the Iranians actually had a counter strategy, and what they did was they shut off the internet. When you shut the internet, then these protesters, because a lot of them are Mossad, right? They're forced to use Starlink. But then when you use Starlink, they're able now to locate where you are. So they were able to take down a lot of these cells. So they killed a lot of civilians, but they also killed a lot of Mossad operatives in Iran. So this has diminished Israeli capacity in Iran. Okay, people don't really appreciate this, but they've been building these networks for years through cash, they've been investing a lot into these insurgent networks in Iran for a number of years, and now a lot of these networks are destroyed.
Right.
So the last option for the Israelis to win a war against Iran is to stage a false flag operation, and then get the Americans to attack Iran. I don't know what this false flag will look like, okay? But we can expect a false flag operation. What's happening around the world this weekend are these protests calling for the overthrow of the Iranian regime. I'm not sure if you've seen these large protests everywhere around the world, okay? But it's clearly being staged by the Americans and the Israelis.
And Mike Pompeo, former CIA director under Trump's first administration, he tweeted saying that these protests, this came from him, his Twitter account saying that these protests were subverted by Mossad/CIA agents. So this is true. Do you think that Americans have to worry about another 9/11, like a false? Well, not saying that was a false flag attack, but do we expect that? Because they always need a catalyst to go to war. Pearl Harbor was the catalyst to bomb Japan, and 9/11 was the catalyst in order to go into the Middle East, right? In order to get support. And again, there was an attack recently at Hanukkah, or during Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah in Australia, and they said it was a Muslim guy. And then a Muslim man ended up stopping the shooter. And they found out that the shooter was taking trips back and forth from the Philippines. He had weird intelligence ties. Do you think that America has to worry about a false flag to that extent?
I think the false flag will probably happen in the Middle East. What will probably happen is a U.S. base gets hit. It'll be very similar to the USS Liberty in 1967, right? And it's a playbook because the Gulf token, like the Vietnam War.
Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's the most likely situation. And Americans are setting this up because they have all these carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea right now patrolling, right? So it's very easy to stage a false flag attack.
The Gerald Ford, I see that U.S. military, one, they said to be careful about leaving flights in Iran right now to Americans. They sent out an email. And the other one, I'm seeing military, people in the Navy are hearing that they might have to be deployed to the Gerald Ford. That's the ship that patrols around the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Another thing I will say is the people running the world today are different from the ones running the world during 9/11, okay? 9/11 was a spectacularly done job, okay? Give credit to these guys, like George H.W. Bush. He was clearly the mastermind behind 9/11, all right? This is a guy who spent decades in intelligence, and he was able to build this network in order to pull off 9/11. Okay, it was a really sophisticated act of theater. The guys in charge now aren't like that. They're kind of lazy. They're kind of incompetent. They're indifferent. They're hubris. Okay, so so it's not going to be as elaborate as 9/11. And I don't think it'll happen on the American homeland, because I think that Americans right now are much more skeptical. They're sort of ready for it. Okay, but it'll much more likely happen overseas, where American soldiers are targeted, and they'll blame it on the Iranians. It's much easier to do that than something
Right.
on the
What
homeland.
about Israel bombed Doha? They bombed Qatar very recently, which is
Yeah.
an American ally, but there was literal no outrage at all from American people, especially coming from our greatest ally bombing another one of our allies. If there's going to be a false flag in the Middle East, then how come there was no? Is it all just media manipulation?
I think it's just media manipulation. The other thing that to remember is that these regimes in the GCC, right, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, they're all co-opted by the Israelis. They're all working together. They're all like colonies of the Israelis.
What about Saudi? I
So
was talking to Nick Fuentes the other day, and he said that Saudi has separated from being the Israeli ally that they were several years ago. Is this true?
no, it's all theater. So if you look at the history of the Middle East, okay, it was created by the British Empire, right? So the House of Saud was installed as a puppet regime by the British Empire. And so then the question is like, who is the House of Saud? And if you actually go into some of the history, okay, so this is 2003, the Americans go into Baghdad and they capture all the state systems of the Iraqi regime, okay? And when they go over the files of the Iraqi intelligence agency, the Iraqis were absolutely convinced that the House of Saud were crypto Jews, that these people, the House of Saud, these were crypto Jews. They were Sabbatean Frankists, okay?
Yeah.
So this goes back to Sabbath Zevi. 1666, he declares he's a Messiah, and then he is threatened by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, saying that either your head or the turban. Okay, you either convert to Islam or I will take your head. And Sabbath Zevi converts. And then 300 families called the Dome. It's called churn code in the language.
Turks.
But they convert with him, the Turks, okay? And the Dome are important because the Dome then aligned with the British Empire to overthrow the Ottoman Empire. And the Dome are the ones who are responsible for the Young Turk movement, for Ataturk, okay? But not only that, but the Dome then spread around the region, and they also become the House of Saud. Okay, so that's the origin of these families in the Middle East.
Is this proven about the? I love Saudi Arabia. I travel there all the time, but what's the evidence of that?
Well, I mean, again, I don't actually use documentary evidence in my classes. I use a lot of first principle thinking. Okay, but I'm trying to explain why the House of Saud is in charge, who put them in power, and why they were put into power, and who the British Empire would trust to put into power. Okay, so so the British Empire put the House of Saud into power. Why would they do that? And well, they would do that because they know the House of Saud would be loyal to the British Empire. And why would they be loyal? Because the House of Saud is compromised and they're secretly crypto Jews, and therefore they have no choice but to align with a greater power, whether it's the British Empire or the American Empire afterwards. So again, I don't have evidence. But I'm saying this is what makes the most sense for me, right? Okay. Because what I do is I create frameworks, I create models of the world, and then I test it, I validate it by testing it, by making predictions about it, okay? Mm-hmm. So my prediction is that Saudi Arabia and Israel, the conflict right now, it's all theater. And if Pax Judaica were to arise, then Saudi Arabia would be a very important part of this Pax Judaica. And the question then is, why do you have this conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel? And I think the reason why is, if there's a war, then Iran, the Iranian strategy would create economic warfare. Okay, so it would destroy the economies of the Middle East, which would force the world to get involved in this war. Right? That's the only way that the Iranians could possibly win this war, by creating as much economic pain as possible for the rest of the world. And you do that by blowing up the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, right? Because they have drones and ballistic missiles. And so Saudi Arabia is trying to hedge against this. It's trying to play the victim and says, look, listen, We're your best friends. We're the ones trying to stop the Israelis from attacking you. So why you blow up our oil fields?
Do you ever worry about travel? Because, you know, I visit Saudi all the time, and people make allegations that Saudi is killing journalists. And I've seen you've traveled to Saudi before. Has any of this ever, are you banned from any countries? How does this affected your personal life?
You know, this is something that I don't really worry about. And the reason why is I'm not actually embedded into power networks, okay? So you look at someone like Charlie Kirk, right? He was getting money from these guys. And if you're getting money from these guys, then you're bought by them. So if you speak out, if you don't toe the line, then it's considered betrayal, right? So I don't take money from these guys. I don't even know who these guys are. So I'm this random high school teacher, you know, just, you know, and I have a YouTube channel, right? I'm this random YouTuber.